under.
Hello and happy the Chinese New Year of the Horse. I'm Tian Wei and you're watching World Insight on CCTV News. We start with the elections in Thailand. The country has gone to polls in an election boycotted by the opposition and disrupted by protests. Anti-government protesters forced the voting to be cancelled out of the 333 districts. Prime Minister Shinawatra has called for elections after weeks of street protests by the opposition, which calls for her removal. Her party is expected to win once again, but more challenges are likely in the coming days, if not months.
It's the Lunar New Year in Thailand, but this year the celebrations are marked by violence. Clashes between protesters and government supporters erupted as Thai voters go to the polls on Sunday to decide on the country's future. The confrontation began Saturday after government supporters marched to a district office in northern Bangkok containing ballot boxes. The boxes have been surrounded by protesters trying to derail the vote. Urging demonstrators to show restraint, caretaker Prime Minister Shinawatra has cast her vote at a polling station near her residence.
I'd like to ask for cooperation to please allow the people to go in and exercise their right to vote, because this is everybody's right. I do not want there to be any obstruction of the election. I'd like everybody to use this as a stage to express their opinions.
Inlock is hoping the election will reaffirm the mandate she won convincingly in 2011. But the opposition is boycotting the vote. Demonstrations kicked off in November after Thailand's lower house passed the controversial amnesty bill. The bill would have made it possible for the former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, brother of the current Prime Minister Shinawatra, to return to Thailand politics without serving time in jail over corruption allegations. All opposition members in parliament resigned a month later. Inlock had to dissolve the House of Representatives, triggering the general election.
When they close the ballot boxes today and count all the votes, they won't be able to announce the party list members of parliament. The votes will not come from the entire country, so they won't be able to announce them. Therefore, this election is a waste of money.
Sunday saw protesters blocking access to various polling stations in Bangkok. But for the voters, the desire to vote seemed strong.
They have the right to voice their different opinion. They have the right to protest the government, but they don't have right to prevent other people from doing their duty.
Government supporters called themselves the Red Shirts. It was them who propelled Shinawatra to power, and they want to ensure that she stays.
We need to preserve the democratic system. We won't let those who don't want this election to threaten people who want to vote. They should be able to vote without concern.
Although unrest has already hit Bangkok, voting was expected to proceed smoothly in most of the country. But the parliament may still be short of members to convene, as protesters have already blocked candidate registration in some districts. The divided country is likely to be stuck in a political limbo for months, with the winter paralyzed by street protests and legal challenges.
For the latest on the Thai elections, we are joined by our correspondent Ryan Meltzer in Bangkok. Ryan, when can we, with all of the complexities on the ground, expect the result of the election?
Well, normally people would have been glued to their televisions from 3 o'clock in the afternoon on as they eagerly or anxiously awaited the results rolling in. That's normally what happens. This year was out of the question, this election, because of the fact that people couldn't vote in some 9 provinces, that there were no candidates at all in 28 constituencies. So the Election Commission can't come up with the final list for the so-called party list. People vote for a candidate and people also mark the check on the box for their party choice as well. And they can't do that while the voting has not been completed in all these places. So now the Election Commission says the earliest they will release even preliminary results is February 23rd. That's when they're going to give people who weren't able to vote in the advance polling last Sunday a chance to cast their ballots again. But how can they go ahead and do that? Will they be allowed to do that if these protests keep continuing? So that's just the earliest date that it's possible to get a result. But a lot has to happen before that can even occur.
Certainly, yes. 3 more weeks to go. A lot could happen during that period of time. But what we understand now is really with the main opposition boycotting the vote, it is a foregone conclusion already. Yingluck Shinawara's party will win possibly a majority again. But is that really, if that is the result, going to be enough to end the political standoff in Thailand?
Well, clearly the opposition would say there was no legitimacy to this poll at all. They wanted reforms before there was an election. They don't consider that Yingluck is a legitimate prime minister. They consider it to be a proxy or a puppet for her brother Thaksin. So they would say there was no legitimacy from the start. Yingluck, on the other hand, and her supporters will say people were given a chance to vote. If the Democrats wish to boycott it, that's their choice. People, despite all the intimidation, despite all the obstacles, came out in large numbers and tried to cast their ballots, and she will win a majority. So she would claim that she does have a mandate. But the reality is that there still has to be some solution, some compromise between these two sides. Otherwise, this country is not going to break this deadlock.
Right. And in Thailand, as we all understand, there are much more factors that might have a result on who is going to be the prime minister of the country and which party is going to win the election. For example, the role of the military, the role of the royal family, and how these factors might influence the ruling party and the opposition. What do you think might be their roles? Ryan.
Well, the military has surprised a lot of people by standing back to this degree, by being very neutral or trying to be very neutral. It has said it will only intervene if there is violence that spirals out of control. I believe that the anti-government demonstrators would have liked the military to intervene one way or another on their side. They have not done. They have refused to do that. I think they got badly burned. Their reputation was tarnished. Their prestige was tarnished when they took power and ousted Thaksin Shinawatra in 2006. They don't want a repeat of that. So they're staying on the sidelines. But for how long will they allow this protracted situation to continue? If it continues to damage the economy, continues to damage Thailand's reputation internationally before they take action? That's the question. But until now, they've been steadfast. Unless there's violence, unless it spirals out of control, they will remain on the sidelines.
Well, a big question mark over there, but we want to thank you for your reporting. Ryan, thank you very much. So what will be the implications of today's vote in Thailand? Talking to us are from Bangkok, Krinsak Shewongwangsak, a former member of the Democrat Party and a visiting fellow at Harvard University in the United States. In London, we have Tim Forsyth, an expert on Thai politics from the London School of Economics, and here in Beijing, an expert on Southeast Asian politics, Mr. Song Qingren from China's Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Gentlemen, welcome to our program on a very important day for Thai politics. I wonder, earlier you've been hearing our correspondent talking about his feelings about whether once the election result comes out, it would necessarily put an end to the crisis in Thailand. What do you think will happen, Dr. Krinsak?
I doubt that this election will bring a conclusion of this conflict. Basically, the conflict will continue for many more rounds. This is round one only in this scheme. And therefore, you see a lot more going on for the next few months. If nothing being intervened in an unusual way, you will see that even trying to complete the entire seats in the parliaments so that parliaments can convene and choose the prime minister, it will take about 3 to 6 more months, in my opinion. I did not hear your correspondence just now because the sound did not come through, but let me just say my own opinion is that is 3 to 6 months. If the process go on like this with resistance on the street, continue and determine not to quit, and the fight will go on until one side weaken and both sides will be in agreement for some amicable solution. Therefore, I do not think that this election will be a conclusion. In fact, it's a ceremony that is very needful for the Prime Minister to have so that legitimacy may come about. But because the main opposition party, which I no longer belong to, I'm totally independent, but let me say this, that the main opposition party are not contesting, therefore it's going to be very hard for the government to govern because they will not have a real opposition. And this is not going to be a very wonderful situation for democracy. Therefore, it's very, very fragile,
right.
and anything can happen from now till then.
Well, anything could happen, but what does it say, Tim? Just pick up what Dr. Quinsack just said. What does it say about the nature of democracy or the maturity of democracy in Thailand reflected by this event?
Well, it's a bit of a disaster, really, for democracy, isn't it? I mean, analysts like myself like to make a distinction between procedural democracy, which is based upon how you vote, such as one person, one vote, and substantive democracy, which is what you get after you've had an election. In other words, whether the procedure actually leads to some kind of substantive change and progress. I think what we're happening in Thailand at the moment is that they are having procedural democracy, but it is not substantive democracy. In other words, the current government at the moment is democratically elected and probably will still be democratically elected tomorrow. However, what it will lead to is a situation where you have an unelected person who has a corruption charge attached to them still having influence over the government of Thailand, and that is not substantive democracy. So somehow Thailand has to move between hanging on to the procedural democracy but actually making it work in terms of the actual substance of who is allowed to govern.
Dr. Quinsack, do you agree with that? You're only having procedural democracy, not quote-unquote real democracy, according to Tim.
I have to agree with Tim, but I changed the term into that it is a form of democracy, which is needful, yes, but the content is not there. The essence of democracy is not fully there. You know full well in Thailand, a lot of politicians buy votes, and all parties would admit behind camera that some of their members, at least if not a lot of them, buy votes. How would you treat that as real democracy then? And when they come into power, most parties who govern the country will siphon off some money, and you can test my hypothesis that it's real, that corruption is prone in this area of the world.
All right.
And how can you call that real democracy? And we have to contest for both form and essence of democracy.
Qingren here in Beijing, listening to the other two panelists, what do you think about the nature of democracy in Thailand, particularly after both of them agree that it is only procedural? Then, does it really work in Thailand? It is only a ceremonial thing, or is it really addressing some of the political future of that country?
I think Thailand democracy is just have the procedures, the process, but I don't think the ordinary people or the politicians obey the rule, the democratic principles, the rule of law. When they have different interests, different opinions, they will just demonstrate to confront with each other, not to use the democratic way to resolve their different opinions, different interests. So this is the disaster to the Thailand democracy.
What are you referring to, Qingren, when you say they are not using so-called the democratic way to resolve their differences? What do you mean they are? It seems opposition are on the streets, another election being conducted.
I want to say that although the Yingluck government put forward the democratic election, but on the other side, the SUTEP-led demonstration just boycott the democratic election. We can see that the election is a very important procedure for the democratic principle. But we can see that the demonstrators boycott the election. They occupy the government buildings. They just block the ordinary people's basic rights to vote. So this is illegal and violent.
Right. Well, Dr. Quinsack, does it really say much about the wrongdoings, or rather the immaturity of the Thai democracy, or rather it is only demonstrating the credibility of the so-called opposition?
You know, I think I'm encouraged to know that this is an education process for a lot of our people nationwide, for them to get involved and get to hear and to evaluate. Therefore, I'm hopeful that out of this mess will come out to a better democracy in the future. I know that this is a tough time. The opposition are desperate because they realize that with the type of the way they organize their party and the lack of good management in making it effective and winning more seats, they could not win. And Thaksin's regime has been very powerful, undoubtedly. And therefore, they know that it's impossible for them to do anything, and that's why they come on the street. That's probably behind the scene reason why they also come on the street. But we have to honor those who are protesting on one way, that reform agenda should be called upon for a long, long time. I wrote a book 17 years ago on total reform of Thailand. And ironically, the former Prime Minister Thaksin was one of those who write endorsement forward for my book. Therefore, the call for reform has been going on a long time.
What is interesting, Tim, here is you have the opposition protesting on the street, but many also question the credibility of the opposition about representing change, representing a possibility of reform. Many have also pointed out politicians there in the opposition are mainly very similar to who are in power once they could be in power. Tim, what is your feeling about this?
Well, actually, I think that's absolutely right, and it's one of the great problems of this current crisis in Thailand, that the people leading the opposition, in order to call for better democracy, do not actually have a very good reputation for democracy themselves. I mean, at the very least, they are demanding a People's Council to represent decision-making, but this council will not be elected. So that's the first thing. It's not a democratic solution. And the second thing is that Suthep himself, the leader of the opposition, has a long history of being accused and found guilty of misdemeanors concerning corruption charges. First of all involving land deals, and then secondly concerning the unallowed ownership of the media company when he was actually in the government. He was also in charge of the security forces. He was a sort of political leader in charge of the security forces in 2010 when the red shirts occupied Bangkok, and they'd ended up with the security forces killing 90 red shirt protesters.
Very complex
so he himself is not a very good representative.
Obviously, there are debates about that. Finally, before we go, one very important question to all of the three of you gentlemen. Then what's going to be next? What's next? That's all the question that we have on mind. Are we going to see negotiation between the Yingluck administration and the opposition? Are we going to see the Yingluck administration making compromises when it comes to rights, subsidies? Or are we going to see the opposition, in fact, in a way, try to make sure they could become more credible by making some of the compromises? What are we going to see, Dr. Quinsa?
I think there will be a huge possibility that the Anti-Corruption Commission will come forward with the rights pledging scheme soon to derail the government and open the door for some sort of a change that it looks a bit constitutional. I think that is a most likely scenario that can happen. And a vague possibility, which is the last resort, is the military may even come forward reluctantly. And I'm hoping not, but it may if the whole conflicts drag on and create more turmoil, more bloodshed.
I see.
I hope they are tame and it will be within reasonably bounded by the Constitution.
Qingren, your analysis very briefly.
I think it's very difficult for the two sides to reach compromise. And in the next following months, 2 or 3 months, there will be continuous confrontation, demonstration, and other lawsuits and turmoil situation.
And Tim, before we go, of course, the economy is going to suffer a lot. Will all of these factors come together, being cooked together, and eventually make the politicians make some compromises among themselves, or are we talking about a very unlikely scenario?
I think ultimately there will be a successful outcome, or at least something better than what's happening at the moment. But I think the real progress will be made in negotiations with people who are not obvious at the moment, such as with the military. I think both sides will be negotiating with important power brokers outside of the current political parties who might have the ability to intervene and take over, such as the army. So I think a lot of the progress will depend on how either the government or the opposition make friends or make enemies in people such as the army.
And of course, we're going to watch that story very closely, as it is one of China's very close neighbors. We want to thank the three of you for this round of discussion. Queen Sack, Sharon Wang Sack, Team For Right, and Song Qingren. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. And Happy New Year to the three of you.